good morning, good evening, good night, everyone. I'm going to start now. Thank you. I want to remind you all that I'm going to talk about two different ongoing doctoral projects. We try to unify or translation devices and other important things. But there are times I'm going to talk about the students from an indigenous background or women from the Me Too movement in Mexico. And first, I want to talk about the title, a, li- a, level, a level playing field, exploring how marginalized groups are represented in digital media. So, when we are talking about that level playing field, we are implying that the rules of the game are not the same for all actors that are engaging in the same game field. So to say, well, I am borrowing Bourdieu's metaphors of game field. And what we want to do is to make these rules visible and see underlying issues about power relations, about the different strategies that social actors use in order to legitimate their positions, strengthen their positions in the game field. In short, the strategies that they use to strengthen the positions and how these strategies are questioned or legitimized. And so very briefly, this is what we are going to do in the proper order. I am not going to stop a lot here because this will be very clear during the presentation. Here, I want to talk about what we are going to do, how we are going to do it, and most importantly, why we want to do this. First, we ask ourselves, in relation to the context of inequality, we consider the relationship between ways of representing social actors from marginalized groups and their legitimacy, or the legitimization as knowers. And how are we going to do this? How are we going to explore this relationship? Well, we are going to focus on the specialization plane, since this plane makes visible how digital media legitimates or delegitimates the beliefs, identities, and stances of the social actors. And what do we want to do? We believe that digital media influence the building of opinions, beliefs, and values towards a group. Thus, the study of this dynamic reveals important social inequalities that still need to be addressed. And I want to talk a bit about ourselves as investigators and where we are coming from. Our set of beliefs that orient this investigation from a critical position or approach. And we believe that different social actors dispute for legitimacy, and the media plays a key role as mediator. In addition, the rules of the game that govern what is an accepted practice or who is a legitimate knower within digital media is not often clear for the audience or even for the subjects represented, and we want to make this dynamic visible. And now I can talk about all these questions that we are asking ourselves, or big questions, and other questions that we want to make, which are, how is a legitimate knower represented in the interaction of text and image in digital media? And in the case of intercultural discourse, how is the gaze being cultivated towards students from an indigenous background? And in the case of media discourse, how is the gaze being cultivated towards women from the hashtag #MeToo movement? Now, I understand that not everyone here is from Mexico. This is a very international audience. I am very happy right now. So I want to do a bit of explaining about the fields that we are studying. And to help you a bit to understand these particular problems, we have these diagrams in which we represent this big field that we're studying, which is digital media. When we are talking about the work of intercultural education in Mexico, in general terms, we are talking about a transition from a social gaze to a cultivated gaze, in which the work of the intercultural education in Mexico is to cultivate other type of gazes, that is, students from an indigenous background. They are students that are being appropriated in the intercultural education model. And now, in the other context regarding public accusations, there are no legal tools for women who denounce sexual harassment in Mexico. So they have been pushed to find other means to legitimate their accusations. Women in Mexico during 2007 appropriated the Me Too movement, and they have disrupted the social order by breaking the silence. And now, after Me Too in Mexico, there has been a breaking point in women's social movements in which they have decided that we will no longer be silent. We need a shift of perspective and address a whole lot of gender-related issues that still need to be addressed. And so when we are talking about these situations, we ask ourselves, what is an accepted practice, or who is a legitimate knower, and how are these marginalized groups represented in digital media? And so how are we going to do this in relation to the legitimation code theory? We want to explore the social plane. And what is that matters in the field that we are studying? The social plane is a more fine-grained look in the knower code of the specialization plane. And this plane studies the interaction between the subjective relations and interactional relations. And what matters is who you are and what you do, or maybe how. And with this, we want to see the rules of the game and the basis of achievement underlying social fields of practice. And this is where the fun begins. So this is our translation device for subjective relations. You can read it from left to right, but I've been told that it can also be read from right to left. But let's do it my way for now. And on the left, you can see the concepts from the subjective relations. In the context that we are analyzing, that we have integrated in this translation device, we have seen that what matters when subjective relations are stronger is identity and affiliation, and the focus is on the claims of knowledge related to a specific group, and the inscription of a knower related to an identity. From this, we assume that knowledge serves a social purpose. An emphasis is placed on the internal worth of the knower. And when subjective relations are weaker, there is less emphasis on affiliation and identity, and the focus is in relation to a group, in relation to specific circumstances. And from this, we assume that what is highlighted is the external world of the knower, and attributes of the external world, and attributes of the knower that imperil their legitimacy. And here's the other fun part. Now, when it comes to strong interactional relations, we infer that what matters is the ways in which the knower interacts with other fields. And when I'm talking about other fields, I'm talking about legitimated fields by powerful social actors. And from this, we assume that practices are equilibrating the claims of knowledge of the social actors. When interactional relations are weaker, what matters is how the significant other perceives the knower, and the practices are oriented to creating affiliation, belonging. I hope that this will become clearer with our analysis. First, I'm going to talk about the representation of students from an indigenous background. I'm going to segment this analysis, and then I'm going to present the results for this specific case. I'm going to talk first about the image, and then the description. Okay, this is, let's see. Okay, first the image, then the description. Okay, this is an interesting case. We are going to see a shift of codes, from a social code to a cultivated code. Here in this image, we are seeing a woman who is wearing traditional clothes from her community, and there is a strong emphasis on who she is and her identity as an indigenous woman. There are very little visual cues about her status as being part of a university. Well, when we look at the text, we are seeing that there is a shift in what is important, what matters. And so the text is, it was challenging being a young indigenous woman, but I always had in mind my dream of becoming a professional. And so from here we are seeing that the adversities faced by the student are thematized. So what I are putting in first place is that it was very difficult to be a young indigenous woman. And so here we can see that the university's intercultural program is presented as an escape. If you come to university, if you come to us, we are going to cultivate you so you can overcome these difficulties, these adversities. Now, in the next image, we can see Carolina, and she is represented as a legitimate actor according to the intercultural education model. It's a born code. Here, it matters who she is and how she knows as a successful product of higher education. Carolina, she's also wearing the traditional clothes of her community, and she is represented in a classroom setting. So, not only is she a successful indigenous woman, she is also a professional with the right credentials. And in the text, it reads, she returned to her community, the municipality of El Nayar, to fulfill her dreams, teaching children from the Sierra and motivate them to study and go to university. And the rationale here is, well, I read this a bit like a story. So Carolina is presented as an indigenous woman who went to university, acquired the right educational tools, and she became a successful actor of higher education. And then she returned home to her community to teach all these things that she learned to the children in her own community. So we can see her as a successful product of intercultural education. She is importing the knowledge of higher education, and she's going to cultivate others in the same model. We actually have more examples, but since we only have 25 minutes, we only presented the two cases more interesting for us. And in relation to these specific cases, I want to share our first results in relation to this part of the analysis. So, the institutional gaze focalizes these types of knowers according to their social identity and not their cognitive capacities. The visual and the textual representations of the knowers highlight their belonging to a marginalized group, and the institution represents itself as the savior of unfortunate circumstances. The knower is at the forefront of representation. However, the knower is appropriated as a product or result, in other words, cultivated. Here we can also see two rhetorical strategies employed in this type of discourse, in which description, the attributes are oriented to characterizing a social actor, social categories, ethnicity according to their language, gender, and description, which are attributes from the social actors, oriented to his, her capacity or possibility of interacting with others and other fields for getting capital. And now I want to change things a little. I'm going to talk about women from the hashtag #MeToo movement. And it's going to be the same dynamic. I'm going to first analyze the image, and then I'm going to talk about the text. And so from the first example, okay. And so from our first example, we have this image from Carla Sosa. She's an actress. And what is emphasized here in this image is the emotions, her in a very close range, her concerned face, her bad experiences. And this image alone is telling us a story. She has to emphasize her internal work, present herself as the right type of victim in order to elicit a response. And so the audience will be more likely to consider her the right type of victim of sexual harassment. And the text reads, Carla Sosa talks about her life after confessing sexual abuse. With tears in her eyes, the actress told how hard that moment was, and how brave she had to be in front of everyone. The emphasis here is placed in her personal knowledge, her experience, and her identity as a victim is at the foreground. Who she is, her internal conflict, and her emotions. From here, I see a more social code in this interaction of text and image, and the importance that digital media places in who is delivering the message, sorry. Now, another example in which we can see a cultivated code. In this case, there is a stronger emphasis in what the knower is doing. In this image, there is a weaker emphasis on who the knower is. She's not at the center of the image. She's not at the foreground of the image. She's in a mid-range position of the picture. There are other people in this image which takes away the focus on the accuser. This image is from outside the courtroom, and this is important in relation to the text. Okay.
Andrea?
Yes?
Do you want to ask a question? Just jump in.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't start.
No, no, I don't expect you to be able to see everything and talk at the same time. So you, well, she's got a hand up, but she's not saying anything.
Sorry.
Hello,
I'm
you.
Tiffany. Oh, I'm very good, thank you. I'm Tiffany from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I was just raising my hand to, wait for the Q&A section. But anyway, thank you very much for giving me the chance. Thank you very much for your presentation. I like it very much, but I'm just wondering, for the analytical framework, have you ever thought of using Van Leuven's social actor and action theory? Because I saw that you also analyze social actor and action. Thank you.
Yes, it's very funny that you mentioned this because it's actually part of my doctoral investigation. I am using Van Leeuwen's framework of social analysis. Yes, I'm working that with Dr. Patricia. She's right here, and I've been allowed to do this. So yes, thank you very much for noticing this.
Andrea, while I've interrupted you, because people can ask questions anytime, I just wanted to say this is really interesting that you're looking at the images and not just the text, which is great. And I'm really interested in the way in which you're analyzing the image with things like saying, she is the center of the focus. She's not doing anything specifically, really, or the emphasis is less on something she's doing, and then in another picture,
Okay.
it is much more of an emphasis on then doing things, like
Yes.
as you just showed. So there she is, she's fairly static and not even speaking actually in that one. But then the other one, you've got people standing around looking like they're being very, they're doing something, and that
Yeah.
you're using that as one of the many indicators of what kind of social relations are being emphasized here. It's not a question. It's just more of an observation to give everybody, just to remind everybody that this is really, really interesting stuff, because I don't think that there's been that much work done on images and bringing that together with text to look at gazes, for example. So I think I'm just making the observation. I think this is really fascinating. So please carry
Wow.
on.
Okay, thank you very much for this necessary interruption, because sometimes it's very difficult. Like I'm just going and going, and this gives me a very necessary breather. So thank you, both of you. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the text. The text reads: AMLO has the last word for making justice. Complainant in the Felix Salgado case. Basilia claimed that none of the advisors from the Truth and Justice National Committee from Morena were present at the hearing. And well, I just want to make a little annotation. AMLO is the president of Mexico. That's what we call him. So what Basilia is doing, she's appealing to the executive branch of power to receive justice. She's making a very strong appeal to the corresponding authorities so that her case is heard, and she's shifting responsibility. She's appealing to patriarchal institutions to receive justice. Here, her personal experience as a victim is not really important, or the work of emotions, or acting as the right type of victim. But what is important is what she's doing and how. And the underlying message here is, it doesn't matter who you are as long as you do things the right way. You are going to get justice, but you need to rely on the institutions. There is less emphasis on who she is as a knower. Weaker subjective relations put more emphasis on how she interacts with significant others, and powerful social actors, so stronger interactional relations. So here we are talking about a gaze and ways of acting cultivated by institutions. And in this case, we are seeing a blank code. The interesting here is that in the image, the accuser is not represented at all. Here we can only see the accused, a musician who was the target of a public anonymous accusation. And the identity of the accuser is completely gone. The text reads: the accusation that pushed Vega Hill to suicide. The Me Too Mexican musician's account published the anonymous accusation against the musician and songwriter. The accused here is portrayed sympathetically. The accusation is something that happened to him, and it pushed him to suicide. And the claim of knowledge is downplayed. The identity of the accuser is de-emphasized, and the ways of knowing. It's more important to know what happened to the target of the accusation. A public anonymous accusation is controversial. The accuser is absent from the image, and the basis of knowledge claims cannot be attributed to a specific individual. Thus, the anonymous accusation defies conventional legal procedures. This type of claim of knowledge differs, since it cannot be known who is making the claim of knowledge, and so they are represented as having no basis for claiming legitimate knowledge. Okay, from this segment of the presentation, I want to share our first insight and what we are seeing. The case configured by digital media brings attention to what kind of subject one must be and how to act to be seen as a legitimate knower. And from this, we infer that the legitimate knower involves whose knowledge is deemed worthy and what they must do. And the way that digital media shapes this type of discourse is that women must represent themselves as the perfect victim and with emotions, and yet they are represented as so irrational, as not in control of who they are, making women unwitting co-participants in their own subordination, which results in a gendered and embodied representation that diminishes the experience and knowledge of those not in privileged positions, undermining the complaints of the knowers. And this type of patterns perpetuate asymmetrical power relations. And our general conclusions that unify both analyses, students from an indigenous background and women from the Me Too movement, is that in social power relations, power is woven in terms of knowers' claims and what they do or do not, and in terms of who is or is not deemed as a legitimate knower. And the case configured by digital media supports the institutional case, involved and dominant in the production of knowledge. From this type of analysis, me and my colleagues, we are asking ourselves, well, what comes next? What can we do with all of this work that we are doing? Can we talk about the digital case? I think that, well, yes, we can. And which resources can help us? Of course, this is an ongoing doctoral research. We are planning on analyzing this using systemic functional linguistics and appraisal theory. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I think I'm done. So fire away. I am ready for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. That was excellent. Really, and for both of you who, on that paper, really well done. I don't know if what may happen is that people might have some thoughts now, or they might have some thoughts at the end as well when they've heard the other one. Sometimes I've always found it's like in conferences when there's paper after paper, it's not always immediately clear as to what you want to say or ask. But if anybody has anything, Lee, just jump in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. So what was interesting for me, and I just wanted to ask you, were these representations all from the same newspaper? Is there only one newspaper? Did they come from different newspapers? And would something like this be useful in seeing kind of stances of different newspapers?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, yes, when it comes to the hashtag #MeToo movement in Mexico, these representations were taken from different newspapers, from different political stances, left, center, and right. So there's a lot of diversity in political stances. So no, they are not from the same newspaper.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Please, anyone else, just jump in if you have a comment or a thought, or put your hand up if you like, if you prefer doing that. I think it's really, I mean, not only is this sort of an excellent topic, I mean, an important topic, but also really interesting to see analysis that looks at the image and at the text, as I said earlier on. The only thing I would say is that I don't know what institutional gaze means or digital gaze means. What does it mean when you put an adjective in front of gaze, or is it just an adjective in front of gaze, the gaze of this, the gaze, or a kind of gaze, or it's not a. One of the things is the born, cultivated, social, and so on. They're two words that are just one concept. I'm assuming that this is the gaze of an institutional or a kind of gaze, is it?
Yeah, well, it's a very difficult to explain because I've actually been playing with this idea. You're right, I am not talking about a born or innate gaze, but when we were talking about this topic, I was thinking a lot about first of the male gaze and how the male gaze, according to feminist studies, configures the way we look at society, media, and all kinds of things through a masculine gaze. And from here, I try to think about power relations and what happens in the case of students from an indigenous background, like since they are the legitimized actors in which they are not seen according to their cognitive capacities in higher education. So maybe we can talk about institutional gaze that configures the ways that marginalized groups are seen, how they must act, and how they must behave when we bring them to these fields of power.
So there's different. I mean, there are different kinds of uses of the word gaze. Then, in a sense,
Yeah.
there are kinds of like the male gaze is the kind of I was just asking. Rachel's asked, why is the term born gaze used for gaze that requires both inherent qualities and cultivation? Well, do you mean both stronger subjective relations and intellectual relations? Because it was the best term I could come up with at the time.
Okay.
I'd probably want to change it now if I had a chance, because I don't like it. But sometimes you can't go back in time and change things. I'd like to change elite code, but I can't. It's too late. It's been out there for 21 years. I've gotten better at naming things, I can tell you that, but that wasn't the best one ever. Was it Patricia? No, was it, no, what was it? You Yeting, you mentioned your name and I've forgotten it again. You put your hand up.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So, yeah, you can call me Tiffany or Yating. Oh, sorry.
And this is me, Tricia. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, for you. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Carol. So we're just we're looking at this, Carol. We're looking at this notion of gaze, okay? And this is the topic of a lot of discussions. Exactly what is the gaze, you know? In this case, we might understand it as in the multimedia is the way we want the public to see someone, not we, sorry, let me phrase this differently. The way intended for the public to read something. It may sound okay. Is it working?
Yeah, you're doing fine.
Okay. All right. So we are still coming to terms with gaze. And when Andrea mentions the institutional gaze, is something that we've discussed about. We talked about, and I believe, and of course we've had long discussions among Andrea and the rest of the students present today, or the candidates, I should say. What do we mean with the gaze? In public media, is what is the intended way that the public sees the person that is portrayed, whether it's an indigenous student or a student from an indigenous background, see, or a woman who is making an accusation. How do we want this person, or how does the institution or the how to say prevailing should be enforced? And of course, that's not always in benefit for the people who are being portrayed. Okay, but you are right. There's a lot of work to be done in really, defining and saying more, elaborating on what the notion of gay that's useful for the own research. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, thanks for that, Patricia. I mean, I agree. The only thing I would say is that don't, as long as you don't let discussions about definitions get in the way of, answering problems. That's the only important thing as far as I'm concerned. And I think as scholars, we obsess about definitions so much to the point where I'm a big fan of Karl Popper, and he says definitions are not really important. It's distinctions that really matter. It's being able to distinguish between things rather than defining things. That's that may not come across in another language, but it just means that we shouldn't spend our entire time trying to define everything before we say anything in terms of trying to solve something. And I think what you've got here is a really interesting analysis that I hope you write up and publish. Or you don't need much, if you start going into the SFL as well for the paper, you would have too much for a paper. So, I mean, you can do that for a PhD, but I hope you do publish this as well, because it's a really important topic. Yeah. So thank you very much. Did you want to ask something or say something?
Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm yapping you. Just a follow-up question. Actually, sorry, I didn't get the framework that you actually use for the analysis. You said you also use maneuver and social action framework. Did you, or did you use? Can you please give me the name of the framework for your analysis and for your results? You mentioned there are several concepts emphasizing sympathy, appeal to the authorities, personal knowledge and experience, etc. So did you personally come up with these concepts, or they are related to some framework proposed by some authors? Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, we came up with the concepts. No, I'm not relying on any author. Regarding Van Leeuwen, regarding Van Leeuwen, no, I am not using those. I am not using his framework right now for this analysis in this roundtable. Van Leeuwen is part of my research in my doctoral thesis, but not here for this presentation right now.
Can I just elaborate on that a little as well, to say that what they're using is the gazes, the idea of gazes, which is a part of social relations, which explodes the idea of social relations, which is a part of LCT, and that those things like sympathy, appeal to the authorities, and so on, were part of their translation device to translate subjective relations to the data. So they're part of your bridge, aren't they, between the concepts of things like subjective relations and interaction relations and the data that you've got in the media as it's being presented. So those things don't have to rely on an author or authority. They come from the authority of the data, which is far more important than any person as far as I'm concerned. So, but that's just me. So I think that's fabulous. If anybody's got any other questions or comments, you can always come in at the end as well, because I'm looking at the time and thinking, do you want to carry on? Do you want to any more discussion, or do you want to do the second paper?
If there are no more questions, I believe we can carry on and continue with Angélica.
Excellent. Well, I thought that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that, and I really do hope that you write it up. And I mean, it's an important topic. And as I said, and also just really interesting. I think one of the things that I often say about translation devices is that they are portable, they are transposable, they are usable by other studies, they open up new areas of research. They're the means of change, as Basil would say, because they can speak back to the theory and build on the theory. So when we do things like, when you've done things like to look at how images or photographs, in this case, of people are emphasizing certain things and then being able to translate that into LCT concepts, you've got the beginnings of a translation device that could be used by other people, which then become the sort of equivalent. The SFL equivalent are system networks, things like that, close to the data concepts. LCT concepts are code concepts are very far away from the data, which is why we have these translation devices. In SFL, it's the same thing. The rank strata hierarchies and so on are very abstract, and the rest of SFL is an external language description or translation device. So they're like system networks. So it's very similar to sort of like a system network, or beginning of one anyway. So I think that's really fascinating. I think just the translation device, people should never think that translation devices are simply a way of enacting a concept. They also provide concepts in themselves. So I think this is going to be really great. So Andrea and Juan, well done. That's going to be really fabulous work. I think it's also going to be important for the analysis of images and photographs, which we have not done very much of so far in LCT. Although, to be fair, LCT is fairly young, so it's still got lots to do. So thanks very much, both of you, for that. And well delivered, Andrea. Your English is brilliant, so well done.
Oh, thank you. Well.
Excellent, yeah. So now we have Ángel and Angélica. Did I say that right? Close? Vaguely close? Almost?
No, we can understand you. You're fine. Don't. It's much, much better.
It's my English accent, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for being here. This is our presentation title. So we are interested in things that matters and in values. This is the content of our presentation here. And we also have many questions, and the big question is what we do to make things matter. And this implies that we are looking for thinking or trying to think how can we make this position visible, and do we always give importance to the same things, and how do we configure epistemic authorities. So the field context, or the field in context, is healthcare sciences, and as a public health institution, the EMSS, or Mexican Institute for Social Insurance, must have a specific workplace focused on teaching and research. As a result of that, healthcare workers are part of the EMS, but must also publish their work detailing the type of knowledge they are generating and its scope and the future research. So EMSS has two scientific journals, the EMSS Medical Journal and the EMSS Nursing Journal. Our present analysis considers two articles published in 2016, and the first one belongs to medicine, and the second one belongs to nursing. In both articles, we notice that researchers are building and sharing knowledge, but they are also proposing the implementation of programs that consider different institutional needs and requirements in consideration of their co-workers. That's why we consider that there is a visible combination of epistemic and axiological stances. So these proposals in specialized articles are intimately linked to management of values. Researchers manage many options among a set of beliefs and values, and then put them into play to communicate knowledge and to promote changes. To change implies a reorientation of practice and a necessary change of beliefs and values pursuing a change of gazes. And the second context or field is rehab and rehabilitation programs, AA in the Mexican criminal system. In Mexico, AA conferences started as a part of a social reintegration programs in 1998. AA conferences are pedagogical fields of practices oriented to a change of attitudes, behaviors, and values. This implies a change from an antisocial being to a social being. Positive studies in criminology, psychology, and psychiatry showed that convicts on AA conferences have significant and positive changes in their behaviors. And I'm inspired by people and by Sapabina and Marty's positive work on analyzing youth justice conferencing, I wanted to know what makes an alcoholic convicts change and what kind of knowledge helps them to change. This is more like a picture and it's a journey to change. It's a kind of a portrait like this. And it is showing the whole journey to change that it starts from being an alcoholic and finishes with the possibility of being a sponsor. In Mexican Spanish, to be a sponsor, it means that you can be a padrino or a madrina for women. And this is a pedagogical space, and here we have both for 12 tools for both accessing and accessing rehab, and this is the 12 tools. And everything is related to AA conferences. Parameters is guided by a shared AA literature that contains an organization of principles and fundamentals by Bill W. and Dr. Bob. And in this context, we are starting to consider the sponsors or padrinos and madrinas as epistemical authorities, because to be a sponsor means that someone perfectly knows the AA literature and he or she knows how to follow specific procedures, and he or she has the empirical knowledge to keep his sobriety. It also means that they are legitimated to hold conferences and to guide alcoholics on rehab processes. The corpus of my research is here. It corresponds to the step 12, and it's called the message, or in Mexican Spanish, el mensaje. This means that participants offer a testimony of recovery and a commitment to stay sober. So to understand these two fields on axiological terms, we are considering different forms of knowledge here. We are seeing that different kinds of knowledge depend on context, habits, beliefs, interests. So from our perspective, our claim is that every knower has its specialized modes of acting, doing, and being according to their context, habits, beliefs, and interests. And in our research, we start to think this in terms of forms of knowledges and in fields in terms of epistemology and axiology. So in every kind of knowledge, we have specialized modes of acting, doing, and being that are enacted in knowledge contexts, emphasizing different things at a time. In disciplinary or conceptual knowledge, what matters is to know and assume concepts. In procedural knowledge, what matters is to know how to do something. And in attitudinal knowledge, what matters is to know how to be and to know how to behave. However, on guiding putative knowers, we tend to privilege disciplinary knowledge in order to be successful in practical fields that demand certain standards of production and a variety of values, from human values to monetary values, for example. In our research, we start to think these forms of knowledge again in fields of axiology, and epistemology. And we are linking philosophy with SFL and LCT, starting by pointing out what is axiology. And axiology as a system or theory of abstract or concrete things that have value and that are constituted as assumptions or beliefs to guide actions, behaviors, and the ways in which we evaluate the world and events on it. And in this case, we are considering also the human nature of making attributions. As humans valuing knowledge and knowers, we attribute moral and intellectual integrity to people, and we declare them rational in the action and in the investigation, but we condemn them, calling them morally or intellectually neglected, on contrast. Our epistemic approach here in this case is responsibilism. It means that the present approach allows us to emphasize the active nature of the knowing or believing subjects with epistemic responsibilities that are different in every field. Responsibility guides us to consider virtues, and a virtue is the way of being by which man does good, and through virtue man performs his proper function well. Virtue is a teleological conception in the sense that possessing it and exercising it confidently leads man to the realization of certain purposes, like the enact, share, or build knowledge. Because of that, we are considering a virtuous knower profile, and a virtuous knower also considers self-knowledge as an important knowledge. He or she is aware of his or her limitations and abilities or capacities and so on, and it is epistemically responsible, learns how to trust and acknowledges the reliance on epistemic authorities of different disciplines or fields. It is also aware that cognitive or knowledge activities result from communal processes. According to previous considerations, we claim that a virtuous knower possesses axiological knowledge, a knowledge based on virtues and values that govern knower actions on ethical and virtuous terms. As general claims, we can point out that knowledge building also happens in practical and social contexts, not necessarily legitimized by the power of the state. Our hope for humanity is based on research in axiological knowledge principles that may lead to the transformation of professional gazes into humanist professional gazes. And here we have our first trial of translation device linking philosophy with language and then with LCT. We are considering knowledge participants, and also we are considering the theoretical framework of axiology as a part of a form of knowledge. On the first column, we have participants, practices, and belief systems linking axiology with different forms of knowledge, as we just said. And to try to make this visible, we try to point out different theoretical frameworks from systemic functional linguistics, after appraisal theory, and finally genre theory. And for this presentation, we will focus in showing a little bit of the text times as rhetorical movements. On continuing with our translation device, we have here the difference profile of every code, and we are revisiting specialization codes, but now in terms of considering also our axiological frame. So we start to think in every code and in how we can make visible axiological systems through the wording of different values and attitudes in discourse. We emphasize virtues, ethics, and values as a part of specialized attributes of knowledge and knowers. And our lead code points out a virtuous knower as someone that balances different kinds of knowledge, disciplinary knowledge, procedural and attitudinal knowledge, like an Aristotelic or an portrait of a proper cultivated and proper human. In this revisited specialization plane, we are making points and marking points different at different text times of different discourses of our corpora, And here we have healthcare visualizations and shifts. And we will start here with a medical doctor in knowledge code that acknowledges legitimated sources with citations, and he respects core concepts of his discipline, methods, and norms. After we see the same medical doctor in our code prioritizing organ procuration and sharing professional knowledge to improve specialized procedures in favor of patients. Then we see this medical doctor in elite code as a virtuous knower, keeping knowledge in balance by making a portrait of a proper surgeon. And finally, the same medical doctor in a relativist code, moving his values from medical disciplinary values to public bureaucratization values. Here is
Angélica,
important, yep.
Can you just, we've got time, can you just take us through these things a little bit slower? Because I couldn't follow the codes very easily because it's a lot of text, it was hard to pick out. Can you just go through those codes again and just pick out one or two features as to why they are a knowledge code or a knower code or an elite code?
Yep.
Maybe I'm being slow, but it was a lot to take in very quickly.
Yep.
Thanks.
I'll stop a few seconds or minutes in every example.
Yeah, if you can just also tell us why you're saying that's I think you're saying that's a knowledge code, is that right?
Yeah, in terms of axiology position.
In terms of, what does that mean to say in terms of axiology position? What does that mean?
This implies that we are considering the knower as a virtuous one, and he puts values and ethical frames on the building knowledge. So he's also building attitudinal knowledge, and he respect for the epistemical authorities, and he make the proper quotations in respect to the core concepts, methods, and disciplinary norms.
So what we've got here is an emphasis on specialized knowledge and procedures and skills and so on. Stronger epistemic relations, as we were saying, and an absence of anything to do with the what I was going to say is I'm just going to mention something because I like roundtables to be spaces in which you can just chat at any point as well, which is it's always useful to be able to see what the results of things are for each of the codes, but I think it would be really helpful to, when doing the translation device, to have something for epistemic relations and then something for social relations. So starting from the relations rather than from the codes. And I say that because I've made fucking huge mistakes in the past when I was younger and had a head full of hair by starting from the codes rather than from the organizing principles. So it's not a criticism, it's just my experience of what can happen. I'm not saying you've done it, but I have made errors before when I've started from the 4 codes. But the 4 codes are useful to have as a sort of, endpoint to say this is what they are when we put them together. But it's just useful to be able to identify for your translation. I say identify what stronger we get ER is and stronger we get SR is, and then those 2 things can come together. So that was the knowledge code, is that right? Yeah. And then the next one is?
Next one is knower code and axiological or attitudinal knowledge is prioritizing and healthcare procedures to improve organ procuration instead of making another kind of knowledge. His interest is to help humans, to present himself as a proper medical doctor.
Oh, I see. So you're saying, yes, so the basis of being a good person, a virtuous person, is, in this case, not the possession of, or the emphasis of specialized skills and knowledge and procedures.
To get knowledge to help others.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you also, by the way, both of you, for translating everything into English as well. And the next one?
Next one is an elite. So he's balancing disciplinary knowledge with axiological or attitudinal knowledge. He will have the perfect code of a proper researcher, a proper surgeon, and a proper professional in healthcare sciences.
So he's emphasizing both knowledge and being the right kind of person, is that right?
Yep.
And then the last one is just not emphasizing anything?
No.
The relativist next one?
Here he's prioritizing public bureaucratization. So he's interested on showing the management and administration procedures. So it's important to point out the credentials or the adscriptions to an institutional and legitimate institution.
Thank you. Thank you for going through those again, because it's useful to be able to then see, so you can follow along. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks to you.
By the way, I've never heard the word adscription before, so that's a new one on me.
Yeah. This is an example of a nursing work. And in our code, we have here another time respect for protocols, methods, norms, and an acknowledgement of legitimated resources. That's why we have here the citations, here and here. And also, he's recognizing herself as a self-knowledge person, self-knowledged person, and he is aware of her limitations and abilities, etc. In nursing in elite code, we have another portrait of a proper professional, and what matters here is disinterestedness. So I have the knowledge and the power of knowledge to help others and to get a better life form for others. And I'm considering professional as human beings, not just as nursing personnel, but as human beings with needs, with feelings, emotions, and necessities. And visualizing rehab specialized map plane, we have here that men are profiling themselves in the 4 codes, if we consider axiologic, and women only in these 3 spaces here, not in the relativist. That's interest, but I'm not why at this moment. And only some men shift to relativist code. And here we have an example of a woman in the same text, moving text times. And we start seeing a knower who is identifying and enacting values that corresponds to AA, but also to the principles of AA and to share knowledge with others to recovery. And in our code, we see the respect for the core concepts in AA conference and also the method. So he's aware of the name of every step on accessing and assessing recovery, and he knows the principles. She knows the principles of the conferences, and she is starting to identify core principles in literature. Here, as a virtuous knower, we have another woman that he's coordinating AA conference, not exactly as a sponsor, but close to. And he's taking responsibilities, reconfiguring values, and she have the same work on self-knowledge, but she's also communalist because she's sharing knowledge with others and she's helping others with her knowledge in a conference and a literature. In men, for example, we have an elite that it's a really sponsor. Rafael, it's a convict sponsor, a convict padrino, and he is disinterestedness, and he shared also a community commitment to help others and to share his knowledge to help others. And he pointed out himself as a sacrificed person, and is aware of the needs of the participants, but also of his own. But if we change to an example of a relativist code, if we think on attitudinal knowledge and axiology, we can see that it's an absence of a nowhere attributes as virtues, and then anything is beneficial to carry out a practice. And here we have a visualization of bureaucratization via law practices and codes. So Mario starts to talk like a lawyer or like an attorney instead of a person that it's in a rehab process. And as our fifth results in general, we can say that from an axiological perspective, we started to see that people manage different values and beliefs as they are configuring these courses. And that's why they are shifting codes and assuming different profiles in the same text. This implies an influence on considering putative readers in every text time or rhetorical movement. We start to consider also, in some cases, to communicate or to share knowledge implies the pursuit of another purpose, like getting goods and services, or reaching and configuring the assumption of certain social values. We consider that it is possible to find and establish another level of delicacy in terms of SFL that lead us to make even more visible what we call disposition. And we want to say finally, muchas gracias. And also thanks for your patience. I'm a little bit nervous.
Oh, no, thank you. You shouldn't be nervous at all. That was really very well done. And all of all of you have, both of you have English that puts everyone else, well, puts me to shame in terms of my inability to speak anything other than my mangled English. So I'd be really interested to, I think what's been amazing about both the papers is that they are on such important issues. And also, as somebody was saying earlier on, it's really nice to see analyses of issues outside education. I mean, obviously, I'm very interested in education, and a lot of us are here. And I also see education as far more than just formal institutions. I mean, AA is a form of sort of has a pedagogic aspect to it, and obviously, as to digital media and media in general, there's pedagogy absolutely everywhere in that sense. But it is nice to see analyses that are outside formal educational institutions, because LCT is not confined to formal educational research, so it can be used to look at anything. So I'm very pleased about that, and also about such important topics as well. That's really fabulous. I mean, things like AA and Me Too and so on. So that's great. Really interesting. Now, one of the things that I think could be difficult for people to understand is that am I right in thinking that your focus is on anything in which they are putting forward a kind of, so the axiological is your focus, and so because it would be easy to slip into thinking, oh, axiological is social relations, epistemological is epistemic relations, and then you're analyzing which one's being emphasized. But you're saying, I think it is the case, that the axiological is the focus here, and then you're analyzing how they project, what's the basis of that painting of a kind of what's virtuous or what's good or what's bad. Is that right?
Yeah, and also we try to look for basis of the principles of axiological knowledge, because we tend to focus on disciplinary knowledge, and then we have the kind of problems that in college or at school we work too much on disciplinary contents, but after in practice and social practice, everything goes to trash because it's different. We have to manage an amount of values, and we have to take a positioning, but also to make a decision about ethical principles. You have to think as a proper professional, what are you doing to get a better life, or to live, to take a person to a worst context, for example. And we have an era here, a time in the world that it seems to us that we are prioritizing money. To get money is the most important thing. And we think that the most important thing is humanity. And we have to use knowledge to help others.
That's really fascinating. Oh, Yating, you wanted to ask a question about the LCT framework?
Hello, Professor Martin. I'm very interested in this LCT framework, and I would love to read more, but it seems to interact with SFL, isn't it? How does it work? I mean, does it combine with different frameworks, or how does it work? Thank you.
Well, let's turn that to, not to me because I'm not presenting, but to Angélica and Angel. Angel, how are you, and also to open out to Juan and Andrea as well, which is, I think all of you are combining, you did your talks very neatly on LCT, which I think is great because it is so tempting. It is so tempting to throw lots and lots and lots of concepts at people and to put way too much theory into a talk or into a paper. It is very tempting to do that. People often think that the more theory, the higher status, the more concepts, the higher status. And I don't think so. I think it's much better to do a simple thing well than a complex thing badly. I also think that people will likely to only take one thing away from your paper when you write one. That's what I think, is when I write a paper, I think people may take one idea from this, and I hope that idea is not that the paper is fucking a mess. So the best thing to do is to keep clear, and like you have done, you've done a very clearly on LCT. But to relay Yating's question, how are you finding LCT and SFL when you're doing them together in your research?
I think I can say that we start at the point we are considering that wording process. It's in some way to build a portrait of our worlds and of our position in our worlds, or like cosmo, and in Spanish is the cosmovisión, or the way we can see the world. And we link words and buildings with words, so the verbalizing or wording process. We are linking this with word of phenomenon word or phenomenon in words, and we, for example, point out people or actors in knowledge as nouns, for example, and attitudes, actions, and etc. as some kind of verbs, and we start to establish the linking, because visualization process in this course is to build a text. I don't know if Andrea, Ángel, Juan Carlos want to say something about this.
I've got a question, if they don't.
Oh, just before you do, Lee, can I just, I'll just, if no one else is going to take it up, I'm just going to respond to your team to say there's loads of papers on the website, legitimationcodeoftheory.com. There's a page about SFL and LCT there. There's a chapter in the book Knowledge Building about using LCT and SFL together. There's the book Accessing Academic Discourse, which brings them together. And there's a book that came out 3 days ago called Teaching Science, which also uses SFL and LCT together. So there's like a huge amount of work out there that you can find using SFL and LCT together. Sorry, Lee, yes, carry on.
Yeah, thank you. So I was very interested to hear, you showed us how those quotes that you got from the men and the women fitted on different points on the specialization plan. And I was just wondering whether you had any data from them, you know, before they went into the program and perhaps afterwards, so that one could see shifts of particular people over time or anything like that. You know, just a little bit about how your data was collected at which point in time and so on. Just interested to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Thanks to you. I will try to give an answer because of my English, but my data is published for public, and it's on internet, and it belongs to people that finished the program. And we got Rafael, for example, that he's a padrino, a sponsor, but also belongs to people that just arrived at the 12th step, that it's called the message, or el mensaje. And I don't have data from the process because it's too difficult to enter to get
ethics.
To a convict context, to ingress to a criminal institution. I mean, it's easy being citizen, but not as a researcher.
Yeah, okay, because that was what I was wondering about, because I mean, this is such a fascinating topic and such an important one, and you know, you've really showed us the insights. So I was just interested, you know, at what level can a researcher go into that? Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions or anything they want to? Yes, Tanya.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much, both of you. I think it has been very interesting. It's the first time that I participate in one of these roundtables. But I was actually just wondering if you could elaborate on something that goes on in the chat, because there was a question about whether your relativist code might be linked to autonomy. And I can see that there are some answers, but I was hoping that that perhaps the speakers could elaborate on that.
Yeah, thanks. The first time I saw the same thing that you are seeing, but I keep on mind on thinking of which are the values in playing there, and he manages another kind of values if we consider axiology and attitudinal knowledge. So he was like avoiding the rehab processes and the responsibilities of his crime. And he was changing to another playground to reorient the putative reader or something, but just to avoiding. So we was considering this as a part of value management and not as a topic or a target question or a targeting processes like in autonomy. But could be very interesting rethink this in terms of autonomy because of that you're seeing.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, Angélica. I mean, one of the things about LCT is that nothing empirical is limited to one dimension or one set of concepts, and so you know, one has to sort of like there's something going on in that code where it kind of they go out to another field. That's interesting, and that definitely has an autonomy aspect. And I bet that it also has semantics going on in terms of, you know, the relative complexity of the ideas and this context dependence of the ideas and those things. And so they're all really fascinating. I think one of the things about research is making those judgment calls about what you don't look at. So I'm always thinking about music as the space between the notes, not just the notes itself. And when you're writing, it's all the words you do not use. And in research, I'm always telling people that it's what you don't look at or what you don't use that's as important as anything else. So the other great thing, I think, though, is that I think there is, because you can, you know, doing one thing well rather than many things badly. But the great thing is that you can come back to research the same data with different concepts, which I think means you can get to do a series of papers or series of analyses that can build on each other and see more and more attributes and aspects of what's going on. I was saying this in the live and online session recently about how in terms of like what's best sometimes for doing for a particular paper, how about 1 million years ago, I did a talk for the second Bernstein conference in about 1812 or something. And I tried to do 4 dimensions of LCT about a topic that no one knew about. They said they didn't know anything about the topic and they'd never heard of any of these concepts either. And I'm using 8 concepts in one go for analyzing 2 different things in 20 minutes. And it was just horrible. And no one had a clue what I was talking about. And when I tried to write the paper, it was just a mess. So what I did was I got rid of everything but specialization and just focused on co-clash between knowledge codes and knower codes and so on. So I kept it very, very simple. And that made a much better paper. It's called The Wrong Kind of Knower, that paper. But that didn't stop me from then analyzing that with different concepts. And there's definitely other things going on at any one moment. Sometimes the concepts reveal very little. So I've said this before, which is when I'm analyzing, say, a classroom in science, it might have a knowledge code through virtually all of it, except for things to do with, you know, taking assembly or whatever. But so it's not always interesting, but it's definitely worth always keeping your eyes open. It's a good question. Thank you for that, Tanya. It's a good question to ask whether there's something else going on. So I was saying it's a brilliant question. And it's also a great answer, which is, yes, there might be. Your answer was, yes, there might be. And we will look at it maybe later because there's only so much you can do at any one time. But it is really worth keeping your eyes open in case other parts of LCT can be used. But never feel that you have to do it all. I often tell people that learning LCT is like trying to learn a new country or learn about a new city. Is that you don't, you know, you just choose one concept and work with that for a bit and try not to do everything at once. So I think that's both a great question and a great answer. Karine, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say I think today has been really, really fascinating. And but that with working with the different dimensions over time now, sometimes the most interesting stuff is in the minus quadrant, you know, and sometimes it's the hidden thing that sits there. And when your data, you know, when you've got your organizing frame and the data is speaking to it, and that organizing frame evolves because of the data you're looking at, you very often end up with this whole clump of stuff that doesn't fit into your, you know, identifiable quadrants. We had a very similar experience with looking at a community of practice using specialization, where we had all this stuff sitting in the relativist and we didn't know what to do with it. So, and it's, as you pointed out today as well, I mean, there are tensions there and you don't quite know what's talking to you yet, but you put it aside and it's kind of, the truth will emerge, or it'll reveal itself over time, and you recognize that there are in fact, in that case, it was a matter of looking at different kinds of gazes as opposed to just knowledge knower, you know. So sometimes you let it percolate for a while, and that data that sits in that minus quadrant will kind of emerge as something else. No, fascinating stuff today, you guys.
I think that's right, Corinne. And also when it comes to specialization and things like gazes and insights, particularly, the minus quadrant, as you're calling it, is a portal to something else often. So the it can be a portal through to, from gazes to insights and from insights to gazes. It can lead to something else. And in this case, I think because their focus was on the analyzing the axiological aspects, it may very well be that the management, it was a management discourse, wasn't it? And it may very well be that management discourse in itself could be analyzed to, say, a knowledge code or something, but from the viewpoint of what you're looking at, you're considering it to be a relativist code because it has no axiological aspects to it. So I think there's no basis to an axiological aspect. I think that's what you're saying. So the one thing that maybe might confuse people if you don't watch out is that the management discourse could be quite procedural or knowledge-based or something like that. But from this point of view, from your analysis, it is down in the relativist code because it's saying it's not having any basis for a virtuous sort of person. Corinne, did you want to jump back in?
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I was going to say that it felt like that managerialist, that whole space could be illuminated by looking at the epistemic plane, you know, because there is a lot that's identifiable as being dictated by a doctrinal code, but there are such strong either no insight or knower related insights that reveal themselves, especially in that space. But there's also that fantastic, you know, purist, if you can define what you mean by, in that managerialist discourse, the different epistemic relations, you know, the different epistemic plane codes, the different insights, it might actually be quite illuminating.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I think one of the things that's really amazing today is that the topics are really nicely diverse from what we normally look at. Well, not a lot of talks and roundtables are about, which I think is fabulous, and also have been really pushing the boundaries of what we're actually looking at. So, for example, in the first one, images alongside text. Which you did, by the way, very well not to get lost in it. One of the things that you can easily get lost in, and I see this in I poke fun at some of my colleagues in that I work with in SFL, that they will never be able to analyze multimodal discourse as well as they want because they're so detailed about the image and then detailed about the text, and then trying to bring those together, it becomes impossibly detailed. You didn't get lost in the detail in the first paper. And in the second paper, trying to look at something very specific in terms of like the projection of what it means to be a good person. I think that's really really interesting in terms of pushing the boundaries of LCT beyond often some of the topics that we normally look at, and also in ways that are themselves also interesting. And it's clear that you're working towards working with a real sense of trying to build a real sense of sort of rigor with trying to build translation devices. I always emphasize with those things that they're kind of written in pencil because they get changed all the way through until you finish. So translation device isn't developed and then applied. It's usually developed roughly, and then you try it and it doesn't work, and then you change it and you make it better, and then eventually you get to some sort of equilibrium where it seems to be making sense of the data. So I think that's some really good points there. Does anybody else have a thing before we finish?
I will ask everyone here that if you have another comment or feedback, you can write us. Me and my colleagues and friends will put their emails on chat to get in contact.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. Yes, and you can also ask on the email forum if you want to as well. So thank you. And Lee's saying we'll also send you the chat. Mauricio will be taking a copy of that. Will you, Mauricio?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. I'm gonna. If no one else has any. There you go. There's the emails in the chat. Unless anybody else has got any more comments or questions. Okay. In that case, I am delighted. Thank you so much for doing this today and getting up very, very early, and all looking impossibly elegant for 7 a.m. I certainly do not look anything like that when I'm at 7 a.m. I'm normally struggling to even speak English, and I am English. So a fabulous effort all round. Thank you very much for that. And you did really great, really well prepared, really clear. So I think you're going to do really great papers. I mean, I don't have much, in the way of anything but positive feedback, apart from saying it'd be useful to try and focus, not just watch out for not focusing on codes, but focusing more on the organizing principles that then generate codes, just to ensure that you don't get any confusions as I have had in the past. And if you're wondering what that means, the chapter on mixed methods research in knowledge building, I talk about how I started a quantitative tool from the 4 codes, and because of that didn't get the right results. And it's the same thing with qualitative research. If you start from the codes, you can make mistakes because it's not 4 boxes. So it's a plane, and they're generated by the 2 organizing principles. So we always try and work from the organizing principles forward. But I mean, that's about the only thing I can think of. So thank you so much, everybody. And before everybody goes, I'm just going to say my phone has just told me that tomorrow in 26 minutes time is the anniversary of the death of Rob Moore, who's many of you wouldn't know, was my best friend who worked with the ideas of Basil Bernstein and was very important in supporting the emergence of LCT, and was the only person I got to speak to for about 10 years. So thanks. I just want to remember him for a moment, and also then thank everyone for being here today, and particularly those in Latin America who got up so early.
And also, Carl, remember to invite people for next week's roundtable.
Oh, thank you, Mauricio. I knew there was something that I was trying to remember, but it is like 25 minutes to midnight, so my brain is barely there. That's right. Our next roundtable is a week's time, not 2 weeks' time as usual, but a week's time. So don't forget that. It will be back at the normal time of 4 p.m. Sydney time. So 4 p.m. Sydney time will be the next roundtable next week and the week after. So we've got 2 weeks in a row. sorry, no, this next week and then 2 weeks after that, sorry. So we've got, no, hang on, that's right, next week and the week after. So make sure that it's also all written up on the website as well. And we'll also send reminders around in the email forum. So if you're not on the email forum, join the email forum now. You can find it on the website, legitimationcodetheory.com. So thank you everyone for being here from all around the planet. Once again, it's such a wonderful community. It's really supportive and friendly. And I hope to be able to chat to some of you soon. So thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.